Hello, welcome back to your tip of the day. I haven't done a tip of the day for a while, so I thought I'd get back into them. Today I'm going to be speaking very quickly about opening the hips with regard to any forms you're practicing, Taiji form, Bagua form, whatever. It'll apply to any martial arts you're doing. Talking about, a form where you've got to take a step, and let's say, for example, this foot's pointing to that wall, and I need to take a step where I've got to open the hips up and get like a 90-degree angle in the feet before then coming forward, for example. And a lot of people struggle to get that full 90-degree hip opening, or in some cases you have to go even further than 90 degrees in some of the forms that I teach. So how to get that to happen, and why can't you get that to happen? First, there's three things we're going to look at. Okay, the first one is very obvious. You're just not flexible enough. You physically can't open your hips. So no amount of going like this is going to help that. You need to do some hip mobility, some simple functional hip mobility exercises. So that's pretty obvious. We don't need to talk about that. What we want to look at is someone who can open their hips to 90 degrees, but they struggle to do it when they're doing their form. Okay, so the first thing we look at is when you try to take, we'll just stick with that 90-degree one for now. So you've got your left foot pointing to that wall, and I've got to step to this wall, so that's a 90-degree angle. Can I do that without, of course, doing this? See how my knee's buckled offline now? That's obviously no good. So I need to open that up. So quite often the knee will buckle in because I can't get my hips open enough, so I'm buckling the knee to get me further around. So that's a big no-no, obviously. So we need to make sure that it's not just the feet that are pointing to the 90, you see, and knees buckling, it's your knees that have to be pointing to that 90-degree angle, or whichever angle you're looking at. So if you are struggling with those kind of steps, the very first thing to do is hold on to something, okay? Literally just hold on to something so you've got balance, right? Just grab a wall or a door or something, and then try to take the step whilst you have that balance aid. If you find that you can do it with no problem whatsoever, and you're like, oh, I'm all in alignment, check yourself, is that foot still there? Yeah, everything's going well, I can do that step. So why can't I do it when I'm not there? Well, then obviously it's a balance thing. Now, it's not just a case of you're falling over. If you're just falling over, then that's another story. I'm talking about you're able to hold your foot off the ground and get into the position, but you're feeling like you can't get it to that particular spot. The reason for this is simply your muscles are tightening up. Because when you're holding onto the thing like this, you're all relaxed, right? So your muscles are relaxed, so you can open up, no problem. As soon as you let go, you go, all the muscles start flexing up like this, and they're all tightening up. So of course that limits your mobility because your balance is no good. So in that case, you need to work on balance. So that's one thing you can work on. So if you can do it on there, then you know there's no problem with your body. It's not a flexibility issue. It's not a hip range of motion issue. It's simply a strength and balance thing. So strength comes into it a lot as well, because balance comes down a lot to strength as well. If your muscles are really in agony, like try holding your balance when you've got really sore legs. Okay, you might be able to hold a position like this without a problem, but do 50 squats first and then try and hold it, and you'll be like, oh, it's much more difficult. So if your legs are weak, you're going to find it more difficult to hold balance in those more difficult positions. The next thing I'd like to talk about is sinking to open the hips. The more you sink, the more your hips will open, at least for the average human being anyway. Here's a little demonstration for you. Now again, I'm not just going to turn my feet. I'm going to only turn here from my hip joint, okay? If I'm standing upright and I open my hips, that's there. That's as far as my hips will go. Okay, that's, yeah, I'd say that's just a little bit under 90 degrees. If I had to, I don't have a measuring tape on the ground, but that's, to me looking at it, I'd say that's just under 90 degrees. That's how far my hips will open. When I'm in an upright position, if I go a little bit of a bend, they go a little bit more. If I go a little bit more bend, they can go a little bit more again. If I lean forward, they go a little bit more again, but my knees are still over my toes. I have not buckled my knees. So my hips, the more your knee comes towards your chest, so the more flexion you have at your hip joint, the further your hip will open outwards. Now, I'm not saying you should lean forward when you take these steps, of course, but you do need to sink. So because you're on one leg, let's take the posture of pung to double pung in the Taiji form, Yang Luchan's form. Here, what happens? Weakness. What happens if there's a weak leg? You rise up. You see? Because your legs are not strong enough, you tend to rise up, so there's less pain on the leg. But because I'm in a rised up position, a risen up position, now, okay, I've got fairly flexible hips, I can kind of just get there, but it feels like I struggle to get there. But if I just sink properly as I take that step, well, now it's easy. There's no stress whatsoever as far as the opening is concerned. So if you find that you're not making it there, probably the very first thing you need to look at is, have you stood up when you're trying to do that opening move? Single whip is another one. People come to single whip and again, they stand up a little bit. And so then they can't get out there. If you just sink, see what's happening when I'm sinking. This joint is bent, here the joint is straight, bending, 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 bending. Now, of course, you can only go to a certain point whilst keeping your body upright. You can't just keep going. There's a limit to how far your body will bend. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll either fall backwards, because your ankle joint is actually the one reaching its limit. So you need to sink, and then you won't have a problem coming around to single whip, you see. You'll be able to open up to that 90-degree angle, no problem whatsoever. So that's what you need to do there, primarily, is make sure you're sunk and staying sunk. And you might even need to sink a little bit more, because quite often people, when they're doing even their normal two-legged postures, they're a little bit up in the legs. If you sink down, really sink down, you shouldn't have any problem doing those 90-degree steps. If you have a step in the form which is over 90 degrees, again, this is for the average person. The form is based upon normal anatomy. Some people have, hypermobile hips and they can do whatever they want. Other people have limited range in their hips because of the way their hips are built, the actual bone structure. I'm not talking about muscle flexibility, that can be changed, but if your bone structure is a certain way, there's not really much you can do about that. So that's the one thing to free up more movement, is sink more, which effectively does that, and you'll get more opening in your hip. Now, the other way to get more opening in your hip, of course, it's more bend here. So I can bend that by lifting the knee up, by sinking down, or by leaning forward. That's still more bend at that joint, you see. So leaning forward will allow you to go wider. So in our forms, the only times you ever take a step more than 90 degrees, because the normal human body, again, this is based on an average person's joint mobility, it's designed to go to 90 degrees at the hips, okay, like that. Anything more than that, maybe I can go a tiny bit more than 90 degrees, like that. I could be regarded as having slightly more flexible hips than the average person, maybe, but not much. It's only a fraction more than 90 degrees. Whereas if I lean forward just a little bit, just go in at the hips, boom. See, now I can point my foot out there. And again, that's not just my foot pointing. You see, now my knee's offline. I'm turning my knee there. My knee is pointing where my foot is pointing. That's most important. So I've now opened to about 135 degrees. Okay, instead of 90, I've got another 45 degrees. And there are steps like that in the Taiji form. but we only do that when we lean forward. The classic example of that is right at the end of the third third. When we come up to step up to 7 stars, like so, we do a little foot adjustment so that the left foot is facing the west, but my right foot now has to swing out and point to the northeast. But what happens first? There is a downward leaning forward movement. You go in at the waist, pelvis goes backwards, hands go down, body goes forward. Then you swing the leg out to the corner. Then you've got your next movement. Okay? So that's how that posture works. You're not supposed to have your spine straight in that posture. So therefore you can do it like that. See, that little bit of leaning forward, it shouldn't be too much. It should only be leaning forward enough to get the job done, kind of thing. And then there's a few other examples throughout the form. There's other times in the form where you might be just reaching just a little past 90, so the lean forward is barely even noticeable, but it is there. See, that one's the most obvious. That's why I use that as an example. That's a very obvious lean, like you're physically going forward. Anyone could say, yep, he's leaning forward. Other times in the form, there might be just, I don't know, for example, what's it called? Spreading the weave? Not spreading the weave. Slanting the fly. Slant flying. From there, this posture here, it's just like that, you see? I'm not absolutely bolt upright when I do this posture. It's just a sort of it's more like a rounded forward position, like a fighting, whoop, I'm going to go down like this. That's the sort of feel. It's not like it's not like I'm actually leaning forward and going in at the waist like I did with the other one, because you're not stepping as far in this particular step. I'm not going to go into all the exact points of the step itself, but just wanted to say that depending on how far you have to open your hips will depend on how far you have to lean forward. So 99% of the steps in our form anyway, your form may be different than ours, but if it's at 90 degrees, which is 90% of the time, you should not have to lean forward. This does not mean, please don't misunderstand me, I do not want you to go, oh, that's a bit hard. Oh, Eli said it's okay to lean forward. No, because leaning forward in a posture that's not designed to be leant forward, you're breaking your structure. Okay? So if I take that posture again, that's strong. Where have I got power? Here and here. What's happening in the posture? You've got to know the application, the Marshall application, to know what should be happening in the posture. If you don't understand the application and you just go, oh, that feels fine, yeah, no problem. Oh, there we go. That's easy now. Well, no, I've totally broken my structure. So do not lean forward as a method of getting your steps open. Use the sinking principle and use the strengthening principle. If your legs are not strong enough, you'll be too tight, like I said before. Now, one last thing I'll say before we finish today. If you have an actual joint problem and you've actually had an x-ray and a chiro or something has told you, look, your hip only opens to here. I've had students like that before where physically their hips just cannot go past that point. No matter where they put their body, they've just got a very limited range of motion. They've got their hip joints effectively, instead of being like that, they're kind of, the joint has a right angle to it, to the neck of the femur, instead of being sort of a 45 angle like most people have. So there's nothing they can do about that. In which case, the only option is to modify the form. That's all you can do. So of course, as an example from this position, instead of getting that full 90-degree opening in the hips, you would of course have to do a weighted turn. You'd do your little movement here, do a small weighted turn, then step, and then carry on, you see. So you'd have to make adjustments. So, you've got an issue with your body. But for any normal person, the tips I've given now should work for you. Thank you very much. Hope that's helped you out for today. I'll see you again soon.